We
Sarah
must
Chun
act
had
now.
always been
The
told she
situation
had kind
demands
eyes.
immediate and
Even
precise
now,
execution
at
of the plan.
53, people would comment on how gentle she looked, how approachable. What they didn't see was the steel underneath, forged through 28 years of naval service that had taken her from a nervous ensign to the youngest female admiral in the Pacific Fleet. The morning started like any other at Chin Maritime Consulting. Sarah arrived at her small office overlooking San Diego Bay at exactly 7 a.m., as she had every day for the past 3 years since retiring from the Navy. Her assistant, Maria, wouldn't arrive for another hour, giving Sarah time to review the contracts and proposals that kept her modest business running. The office was nothing fancy. 2 rooms in a converted warehouse, with windows that looked out over the harbor where massive cargo ships moved like floating cities. Sarah preferred it this way. After decades of grand naval ceremonies and imposing command centers, she found peace in simplicity. She was reviewing a proposal for a shipping route optimization project when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was smooth, confident, and immediately set Sarah on edge. "Admiral Chun, this is Marcus Vance from Titan Maritime Holdings. I believe we need to have a conversation." Sarah kept her voice level. "Good morning, Mr. Vance. What can I do for you?" "It's more about what I can do for you. I'm calling with an opportunity that I think you'll find very interesting. Titan Maritime is expanding our West Coast operations, and we're acquiring several smaller consulting firms to strengthen our position. Your little company has caught our attention." The word little hung in the air like an insult wrapped in politeness. Sarah had dealt with men like Marcus Vance her entire career. She could picture him perfectly: expensive suit, corner office, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "I appreciate the interest, Mr. Vance, but Chin Maritime isn't for sale." There was a pause, and when Marcus spoke again, his tone had shifted slightly. "Admiral, I don't think you understand the scope of what we're offering. This isn't just about money. This is about survival in a changing industry. Small firms like yours are becoming obsolete. We're offering you a chance to be part of something bigger." Sarah set down her coffee cup and leaned back in her chair. Through the window, she could see a Navy destroyer moving through the channel, its crew likely running morning drills just as she had done thousands of times. "Mr. Vance, I've been in the maritime industry for over 30 years. I've seen companies rise and fall, and I've learned that success isn't always about being the biggest fish in the ocean. But it is about being smart enough to know when you're outmatched," Marcus replied, and now there was no pretense of politeness. "Look, Admiral, let me be direct. The maritime consulting business is becoming increasingly competitive. Contracts are getting harder to come by. Clients are looking for firms with global reach and unlimited resources. You're operating out of a converted warehouse with 1 employee. How long do you really think you can compete?" The threat was subtle but clear. Sarah had heard variations of this conversation before, usually from competitors who thought her small size made her vulnerable. What they didn't understand was that she had built her business on the same principles that had guided her naval career: precision, integrity, and an absolute refusal to be intimidated. "I appreciate your concern for my business, Mr. Vance, but I'm quite confident in my company's position. If there's nothing else, I have work to do." "There is something else, actually." Marcus's voice had gone cold. "I'm curious about your recent contract with Pacific Shipping Lines. That's a significant piece of business for a firm your size. I wonder how you managed to secure it over more established competitors." The implication was clear, and Sarah felt her jaw tighten. "I secured that contract the same way I've secured all my contracts, Mr. Vance. Through superior service and competitive pricing." "I'm sure that's exactly how it happened. Although, I have to say, it's remarkable how often former military officers seem to have such good luck with government-adjacent contracts. Almost like there's some kind of understanding in place." Sarah stood up, her chair rolling back to hit the wall. In her decades of service, she had faced down hostile nations, natural disasters, and bureaucrats who thought her gender made her weak. But accusations of impropriety struck at something deeper than professional pride. "Mr. Vance, this conversation is over. Don't call this number again. Admiral, I think you're making a mistake. Titan Maritime is going to dominate this market with or without your cooperation. The question is whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the problem. Sarah hung up without another word. She stood at the window, watching the morning traffic in the harbor, her mind already working through the implications of the call. Marcus Vance hadn't called to make an offer. He had called to deliver a warning. An hour later, Maria arrived to find Sarah still standing at the window, her coffee cup forgotten on the desk. "Good morning, Admiral. Everything okay?" Sarah turned, offering the warm smile that had put countless nervous sailors at ease over the years. "Good morning, Maria. We need to talk about something. It seems we might be attracting some unwanted attention." As Sarah explained the call, she watched Maria's expression shift from confusion to concern to something that looked like fear. Maria had been with the company since the beginning, a young logistics coordinator who had become indispensable to the operation. She had 2 children and a mortgage, and the thought of losing her job was clearly terrifying. "Admiral, what do you think they really want?" Maria asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. In the Navy, she had learned to read between the lines of every communication, to understand the real message behind diplomatic language. Marcus Vance wasn't interested in acquisition. He was interested in elimination. "I think they want our client list and our reputation," Sarah said finally. "Small firms like ours succeed because we build relationships, because clients trust us to deliver personalized service. If they can force us out of business, they can approach our clients and offer them the same services at a larger scale. But they can't just force us out, can they? We have contracts, clients who trust us." Sarah wished she could offer reassurance, but her experience had taught her to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. In business, Maria, there are many ways to apply pressure. The question is how far they're willing to go and how prepared we are to resist. The rest of the morning passed quietly, but Sarah could feel the tension building like the pressure before a storm. She had felt this sensation before, during her first deployment in the South China Sea, when intelligence reports suggested hostile activity in their patrol area. Nothing visible on the horizon, but the certainty that conflict was coming. At noon, the phone rang again. This time it was David Park, her primary client at Pacific Shipping Lines. David's voice was strained, apologetic. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know this isn't coming from me. Our legal department has some concerns about our current contract." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "What kind of concerns, David?" "They've received some information suggesting that there might be compliance issues with how the contract was awarded. Questions about whether proper competitive bidding procedures were followed." The pieces clicked into place instantly. Titan Maritime wasn't just applying pressure to Sarah directly. They were attacking her reputation, spreading doubt about her business practices among her clients. "David, you know that contract was awarded through a completely transparent process. Your company solicited bids from 6 different firms, and mine was selected based on price and capability." "I know that, Sarah. I was there. I argued for your proposal myself. But legal is legal, and they're insisting on a review. I'm required to suspend the contract pending investigation." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of command decision settling on her shoulders. In the Navy, there had always been clear rules of engagement, defined chains of command, established procedures for dealing with threats. In the civilian world, the rules were murkier, but the stakes were just as real. "I understand, David. You have to do what you have to do. How long will the review take?" "They're saying 2 to 3 weeks, but honestly, Sarah, these things can drag on. And in the meantime, we need to find alternative consulting services." "I'm sorry. I really am." After David hung up, Sarah sat in silence, her mind moving through the tactical situation like she was planning a naval operation. Titan Maritime had opened with a direct assault, failed, and immediately shifted to economic warfare. They were systematic, professional, and apparently had resources she couldn't match. But they had made one critical error. They had assumed that because she was operating a small business, she had gone soft. They thought that 3 years of retirement had dulled the instincts that had carried her through some of the Navy's most challenging assignments. They were about to learn otherwise. Sarah picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory. The voice that answered was crisp, military. "Commander Torres speaking. Elena, it's Sarah Chun. I need to ask a favor." "Admiral, good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" Elena Torres had served as Sarah's intelligence officer during their deployment in the Persian Gulf. She was now working in Navy Criminal Investigative Service, specializing in cases involving maritime fraud and corruption. "I need some background on a company called Titan Maritime Holdings and their CEO, Marcus Vance. Specifically, I need to know if there have been any complaints about their business practices, any investigations, anything that might give me insight into how they operate." There was a pause. "Sarah, are you in some kind of trouble?" "Not trouble exactly. More like I've attracted the attention of a competitor who seems to think I'm an easy target. I want to make sure I understand what I'm dealing with before I decide how to respond. Give me 24 hours. I'll see what I can find." As Sarah hung up, she felt the familiar calm that came with taking action. For 28 years, her success had been built on 3 principles: know your enemy, know yourself, and never fight on their terms when you can choose your own. Marcus Vance had chosen to make this personal when he questioned her integrity. He had chosen to attack her livelihood and threaten her employees' security. Most importantly, he had underestimated exactly who he was dealing with. Sarah Chun had commanded naval operations in some of the world's most dangerous waters. She had outmaneuvered hostile forces with superior numbers and better equipment. She had earned her rank through competence, courage, and an absolute refusal to back down when she knew she was right. Titan Maritime was about to discover that some storms are worth sailing into, especially when you're fighting for something that matters. And this fight was about more than business contracts or market share. This was about proving that integrity and principle still meant something in a world where too many people were willing to compromise, both for profit. The afternoon sun was setting over San Diego Bay when Sarah finally left the office. As she walked to her car, she could see the lights beginning to twinkle on the ships in the harbor. Somewhere out there, Navy crews were standing watch, protecting waters she had once patrolled herself. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. Tonight, she would prepare. Sarah arrived at her office the next morning to find Maria already at her desk, looking pale and anxious. Before Sarah could ask what was wrong, Maria held up a certified letter with hands that were visibly shaking. "This came by courier 20 minutes ago," Maria said. "It's from some law firm I've never heard of." Sarah took the envelope and read the return address: Blackstone, Morrison and Associates. The name meant nothing to her, but the weight of the envelope and the formal delivery suggested serious legal action. She opened it carefully, scanning the dense legal language until she found the key passages. The letter accused Chun Maritime Consulting of fraudulent business practices, specifically alleging that Sarah had used her military connections to secure contracts through improper influence. It demanded that she cease all operations pending investigation and threatened immediate legal action if she continued to operate. "What does it mean?" Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah set the letter down and looked at her assistant. Maria was 28, a single mother who had worked her way through night school while raising 2 kids. She deserved honesty, not false reassurance. "It means they're escalating," Sarah said. "This is a cease and desist letter designed to scare us into shutting down voluntarily. It has no legal weight unless they actually file suit, which they probably won't because they don't have evidence for their claims. But what if they do file suit? What if other clients hear about this?" Before Sarah could answer, the phone rang. Maria looked at it like it might explode, so Sarah answered. "Chun Maritime. Admiral Chun? This is Janet Morrison from Blackstone, Morrison and Associates. I believe you received our letter this morning." "I did, and I believe you can expect my response through my attorney within the week." "Admiral, I think there may be a misunderstanding. My clients at Titan Maritime don't want to pursue litigation. They simply want to resolve this matter quickly and quietly. If you're willing to discuss terms for a voluntary dissolution of your company, I think we can reach an arrangement that benefits everyone. Sarah felt her temper rising, but kept her voice level. Ms. Morrison, your letter accuses me of federal crimes without a shred of evidence. There's no misunderstanding here. Your clients are attempting to destroy my business through false accusations and intimidation. I understand you're upset, but consider the practical reality. Legal disputes are expensive and time-consuming. Even if you ultimately prevail, the process could take months or years. Can your business survive that kind of uncertainty? The threat was crystal clear. Even frivolous litigation could drain Sarah's resources and destroy her reputation. It was a classic intimidation tactic, one she had seen used against smaller competitors throughout her career. Ms. Morrison, let me be equally clear. I've spent my entire career defending against threats, and I'm not about to start backing down now. If your clients want to fight, they'll get one. Sarah hung up and immediately dialed the number for her attorney, Robert Kim. She had met Robert during a Navy legal proceeding years earlier, and he had since become one of San Diego's most respected business attorneys. Robert, I need to see you today. I'm being threatened with litigation by a company that wants to force me out of business. How serious are we talking, Sarah? Serious enough that they've hired a law firm to send cease and desist letters. I need to know my options, and I need to know them fast. Can you be here in an hour? I'll play my schedule. While Sarah was preparing to leave for the attorney's office, her phone rang again. This time, it was Commander Torres. Sarah, I've got some interesting information about your friend Marcus Vance and Titan Maritime. Tell me. Officially, they're a legitimate maritime consulting firm with offices in Los Angeles, Seattle, and Houston. They've been in business for 8 years and have annual revenues in the tens of millions. Marcus Vance is 45, Harvard MBA, former McKinsey consultant. That's the official story. What's the unofficial one? Unofficially, they've been the subject of 3 separate investigations by different government agencies in the past 4 years. Nothing ever stuck, but the pattern is interesting. They typically target smaller firms in specific markets, apply pressure through various means, and either acquire them at below-market prices or drive them out of business entirely. Sarah felt her jaw clench. What kind of pressure? Varies. Sometimes it's predatory pricing. Sometimes it's spreading rumors about business practices. Sometimes it's tying up competitors in litigation. In one case in Seattle, they allegedly hired private investigators to dig up dirt on a competitor's owner. Found out the guy had a gambling problem and leaked it to his biggest clients. Any criminal charges ever filed? That's where it gets interesting. Every investigation gets dropped or quietly settled. Word is that Titan Maritime has excellent lawyers and deep pockets for making problems go away. Sarah thanked Elena and hung up, her mind already working through the implications. Titan Maritime wasn't just a competitor trying to acquire her business. They were predators who had turned destroying small companies into a systematic operation. At Robert Kim's office, Sarah laid out the situation in detail. Robert listened without interruption, taking notes and occasionally asking for clarification. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and considered the ceiling for a long moment. The good news is that their legal threats are essentially baseless, he said finally. Unless they have evidence that you actually used improper influence to secure contracts, which they don't, this is just intimidation. And the bad news? The bad news is that defending against frivolous litigation is expensive, even when you win. And they know that. They're betting that you don't have the resources to fight a prolonged legal battle. What about going on offense? If they're making false accusations, isn't that defamation? Robert nodded slowly. Potentially, but proving defamation requires showing actual damages, and that's hard to do unless you can demonstrate lost business directly attributable to their statements. Plus, they're careful about how they phrase things. Suggesting questions about your practices isn't the same as making direct accusations. Sarah left the attorney's office feeling frustrated, but not defeated. She had faced worse odds before, but never in a context where the rules of engagement were so unclear. In the Navy, she had always known exactly what she was fighting for and what tools she had available. In the business world, everything seemed designed to favor those with more money and fewer scruples. Back at the office, she found Maria packing personal items from her desk. "Maria, what are you doing?" "I'm sorry, Admiral. I can't afford to lose this job, but I also can't afford to be unemployed for months while this gets sorted out. My sister knows someone at a logistics company downtown. They're hiring, and they need someone to start Monday." Sarah felt a stab of guilt. She had been so focused on fighting Titan Maritime that she hadn't fully considered the impact on Maria. A single mother couldn't afford to take the kind of risks that a retired admiral with a Navy pension could take. "Maria, I understand completely. You have to do what's best for your family. And I want you to know that if things work out here, there will always be a place for you. What are you going to do?" Sarah looked around the small office that had been her home base for 3 years. It wasn't much, but it represented something important to her, proof that she could succeed outside the military structure that had defined her life for so long. "I'm going to fight," she said simply. That afternoon, alone in her office for the first time in months, Sarah began making phone calls. She started with her other clients, explaining the situation honestly and offering to put their projects on hold until the legal issues were resolved. Most were understanding, though she could hear the concern in their voices. Then, she began calling in favors from her naval career. She spoke with former colleagues now working in maritime industries, building a network of intelligence about Titan Maritime's operations. What she learned painted a clear picture of a company that had built its success on the systematic destruction of smaller competitors. The pattern was always the same. Identify a profitable small firm, make an acquisition offer, and when that was refused, begin a campaign of harassment and intimidation. Legal threats, whisper campaigns about business practices, pressure on clients to cancel contracts. Most small business owners couldn't withstand the assault and either sold at distressed prices or simply closed down. But Titan Maritime had never gone after a former Navy admiral. As the sun set over San Diego Bay, Sarah made one final call. This one was to Captain James Morrison, her former commanding officer and mentor. Morrison had retired 5 years earlier and was now working as a consultant for the Pentagon on maritime security issues. "Admiral Chun, I was just thinking about you the other day. How's the consulting business?" "Actually, Jim, that's why I'm calling. I'm going to fight with a company that seems to think they can intimidate me into selling out. I could use some advice from someone who's seen more battles than I have." As Sarah explained the situation, she could almost hear Morrison's mind working through the tactical problem. He had been her mentor during her early years as an officer, the man who had taught her that leadership wasn't about rank or authority, but about knowing when to stand and fight. "Sarah, let me ask you something. Why is this fight important to you? You've got your pension, you could retire tomorrow and live comfortably. Why put yourself through this?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She had been so focused on the tactics of the situation that she hadn't really examined her own motivations. "Because it's not just about me," she said finally. "It's about whether people like Marcus Vance get to decide who succeeds and who fails based on how much money they can throw at lawyers. It's about whether integrity and competence matter, or if the only thing that matters is being willing to destroy anyone who gets in your way." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "You know, Sarah, in 30 years of military service, I learned that the most dangerous battles aren't the ones where the enemy has better weapons or more troops. They're the ones where the enemy thinks they understand you, but they don't." "What do you mean?" "Titan Maritime thinks they're fighting a small business owner who's trying to protect her income. They don't understand that they're fighting a naval officer who spent her career protecting something much more important. They think this is about money. You know, it's about principle." After Morrison hung up, Sarah sat in the gathering darkness of her office, thinking about his words. Through the windows, she could see the lights of the harbor, the steady movement of ships that connected San Diego to the rest of the world. This was the industry she had dedicated her life to protecting, first as a naval officer and now as a civilian consultant. Titan Maritime represented everything she had fought against throughout her career. The idea that might makes right, that power should be used to crush rather than protect, that success should be measured only in dollars rather than in service to something larger than yourself. She reached for her phone and dialed Marcus Vance's direct number. When he answered, his voice was smooth and confident. "Admiral Chun, I hope you've had time to consider our conversation." "I have, Mr. Vance. And I wanted to let you know that Chun Maritime Consulting will continue operations as normal. Furthermore, I'll be expanding our services to include consulting on predatory business practices in the maritime industry. I think there's a real market for helping smaller firms defend against the kind of attacks you specialize in." There was a long pause. "Admiral, I think you're making a serious mistake. This doesn't have to be difficult." "You're right, Mr. Vance. It doesn't have to be difficult. All you have to do is stop attacking legitimate businesses and focus on competing fairly in the marketplace. I don't think you understand the forces you're dealing with." Sarah smiled in the darkness. "Mr. Vance, I've dealt with hostile forces in some of the most dangerous waters in the world. I'm not intimidated by a corporate bully who hides behind lawyers and accountants." "We'll see about that, Admiral." As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt the familiar calm that came before battle. She had chosen her ground, identified her objectives, and committed to the fight. Tomorrow, she would begin the counterattack. But tonight, she would prepare. Sarah spent the weekend transforming her small office into a command center. She cleared the conference table and spread out everything she had learned about Titan Maritime. Corporate filings, news articles, witness statement from other companies they had targeted, and a detailed timeline of their acquisition pattern. On Monday morning, she was ready to implement what she privately called Operation Integrity. The name reminded her of her naval days, when every mission had a code name that captured its essential purpose. Her first move was unexpected. Instead of hunkered down defensively, Sarah decided to go public. She called the San Diego Business Journal and arranged an interview with their investigative reporter, Michael Chun. Michael had covered several stories about corporate malfeasance in the local business community, and Sarah knew he would understand the broader implications of what Titan Maritime was doing. "Admiral Chun, thank you for agreeing to speak with us. Can you tell our readers what's been happening with your company?" Sarah had prepared carefully for this moment. She knew that once she went public, there would be no backing down. But she also knew that silence was exactly what Titan Maritime was counting on. "Michael, I want to talk about a practice that's becoming increasingly common in the maritime consulting industry, and probably in many other industries as well. Large corporations are systematically targeting smaller competitors not through fair competition, but through intimidation and harassment." She laid out the timeline carefully. The initial acquisition offer, the threats, the legal intimidation, the pressure on her clients. She was careful to stick to facts that could be documented, avoiding any speculation about Titan Maritime's motives or methods. "What evidence do you have that this is part of a pattern?" Michael asked. "I've spoken with owners of 6 other small maritime consulting firms on the West Coast. All of them report similar experiences with Titan Maritime over the past 3 years. Unsolicited acquisition offers followed by various forms of pressure when those offers were declined." Sarah had spent hours on the phone over the weekend, building a network of other business owners who had been targeted by Titan Maritime. Most were reluctant to go on the record, but they were willing to share their experiences anonymously. One owner in Portland told me that after he refused to sell, suddenly 3 of his biggest clients received anonymous tips about financial irregularities in his company. He spent months and thousands of dollars proving those tips were false, but by then, the damage was done. "Have you reported these practices to any regulatory agencies?" "I've filed complaints with the Federal Trade Commission and the California Attorney General's office." The challenge is that Titan Maritime is very careful to operate in legal gray areas. They don't make explicit threats. They just create conditions that make it difficult for smaller competitors to survive. The interview was scheduled to run in the next day's edition, but Sarah didn't wait for publication to implement the next phase of her plan. She had learned from her naval experience that the most effective campaigns combine public pressure with private action. Her next call was to Admiral Patricia Hayes, who had recently retired as head of Navy procurement operations. Patricia now worked as a consultant, helping government agencies improve their contractor selection processes. Sarah, good to hear from you. I heard about some trouble you're having with a competitor. Word travels fast in our community. Patricia, I need to ask you about something. Is there a way to flag a company for investigation by government procurement offices? Specifically, a company that might be engaging in anti-competitive practices? Are we talking about contract fraud or anti-competitive behavior? Anti-competitive behavior. This company has a pattern of targeting smaller firms and using intimidation to drive them out of markets, particularly markets involving government contracts. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Sarah, there are whistleblower protections for people who report procurement fraud, but what you're describing sounds more like antitrust issues. That would be Federal Trade Commission territory. I've already filed with the FTC, but these investigations can take years. In the meantime, this company continues to destroy legitimate businesses. Let me make some calls. There might be informal ways to flag their practices for closer scrutiny without waiting for formal investigations. That afternoon, Sarah received a call that surprised her. It was from David Park at Pacific Shipping Lines, the client who had suspended her contract pending investigation. Sarah, I have some interesting news. Our legal review found no improprieties in how your contract was awarded. In fact, the review team specifically noted that your proposal was superior to the competition in every measurable category. Sarah felt a surge of relief, but she kept her voice steady. I'm glad to hear that, David. When can we resume the project? That's where things get complicated. While you were cleared of any wrongdoing, our legal team received additional information suggesting that awarding the contract to you might create future compliance risks. What kind of information? Anonymous allegations that you're currently under investigation by federal agencies for misuse of military connections. I know it sounds ridiculous, but our legal department has to take these things seriously. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of command decision. Titan Maritime had moved to the next phase of their campaign, spreading anonymous rumors designed to make her toxic to potential clients. David, I want you to know that I'm not under investigation by any federal agency. These allegations are completely false, and I believe they're being spread by the same competitor who's been trying to force me out of business. I believe you, Sarah, but belief isn't enough for our legal department. They're requiring documented proof that no investigations are pending before they'll approve resuming the contract. After David hung up, Sarah sat in her office feeling the walls closing in. Even when she could prove her innocence, the mere suggestion of investigation was enough to scare away clients. It was a brilliant strategy, she had to admit. Almost impossible to defend against because proving a negative was inherently difficult. But Sarah had been in worse situations. During her deployment in the South China Sea, her ship had been tracked by hostile submarines for 3 days while carrying sensitive cargo. The key to survival had been patience, careful planning, and refusing to let the enemy dictate the terms of engagement. She picked up the phone and called Robert Kim. Robert, I need to explore the nuclear option. I want to sue Titan Maritime for defamation, tortious interference with business relationships, and anything else you can think of. Sarah, we talked about this. Proving defamation is difficult, and they have deep pockets for legal defense. I'm not interested in winning money, Robert. I'm interested in discovery. If we file suit, we get to subpoena their records, take depositions from their executives, and force them to answer questions under oath about their business practices. Robert was quiet for a moment. That's actually not a bad strategy. Even if we don't win the case, the discovery process could expose patterns of behavior that would be useful for other investigations. But it's going to be expensive, and there's a risk of counterclaim. How expensive? To do it right? Probably $50,000 to $75,000 just to get through discovery, assuming they don't drag it out. Sarah thought about her savings account, built up over 28 years of military service and careful investment. She had planned to use that money for a comfortable retirement, maybe travel with her husband when he retired from his engineering job in 2 years. Do it, she said. The next morning, Sarah's interview appeared in the San Diego Business Journal under the headline, "Local Admiral Takes Stand Against Corporate Intimidation." The article was fair and factual, letting the evidence speak for itself without editorial commentary. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah's phone started ringing at 7 a.m. with calls from other small business owners who had faced similar pressure from large competitors. By noon, she had heard from 12 different companies with stories of intimidation, anonymous accusations, and pressure tactics designed to force them out of business. But the most significant call came from Jennifer Walsh, an investigative reporter for the Los Angeles Times who had been tracking corporate consolidation in various industries. "Admiral Chun, I read the article in the Business Journal, and I think your story is part of something much bigger. I've been investigating aggressive acquisition practices in multiple industries, and Titan Maritime keeps appearing in my research." "What kind of research?" "I'm working on a series about what I'm calling predator corporations, companies that grow not through innovation or superior service, but by systematically destroying smaller competitors. Titan Maritime has been mentioned in connection with at least 8 different small firm closures over the past 3 years. Are you planning to publish this?" "That depends partly on you. I need sources who are willing to go on the record about specific tactics. Most business owners are too scared of retaliation to speak publicly." Sarah thought about Maria, about David Park's legal department, about all the other small business owners who had been targeted by companies like Titan Maritime. Fear was exactly what these predators counted on. "What do you need from me?" "Everything. Documents, witness statements, a detailed timeline of their campaign against your company. But I have to warn you, the publication of a major investigation could make them even more aggressive in their response." "Ms. Walsh, I spent 28 years in the Navy protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. I'm not about to stop now." That afternoon, Sarah was working with Jennifer Walsh to organize the evidence when her phone rang. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar but businesslike. "Admiral Chun, this is Thomas Blackwood, Chief Operating Officer of Titan Maritime Holdings. I believe we need to have a face-to-face conversation." "I'm not sure what we have to discuss, Mr. Blackwood. I think you'd be surprised. There seems to be some misunderstanding about our business practices, and I'd like the opportunity to set the record straight. Are you available for dinner tonight?" Sarah considered the offer. In the military, she had learned that sometimes the best intelligence came from talking directly to the enemy. "Where did you have in mind?" "The Harbor Club downtown. 7 o'clock. The Harbor Club was one of San Diego's most exclusive restaurants, the kind of place where business deals were made over expensive wine and even more expensive steaks." Sarah chose her clothes carefully, a navy blue blazer that echoed her military background, simple jewelry, and an expression that revealed nothing about her thoughts. Thomas Blackwood was waiting for her at a corner table with a view of the harbor. He was younger than she had expected, probably mid-40s, with the kind of polished appearance that suggested expensive grooming and careful attention to image. "Admiral Chun, thank you for coming. I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of ordering wine. I don't drink during negotiations, Mr. Blackwood." He smiled, but Sarah could see the calculation behind his eyes. "Please call me Tom. And I hope this doesn't feel like a negotiation. I prefer to think of it as a conversation between professionals. What exactly do you want to talk about?" "I want to talk about the future. Specifically, your future and how it might align with ours." Sarah waited, saying nothing. In the Navy, she had learned that silence was often the most effective interrogation tool. "Admiral, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about our intentions regarding your company. We're not trying to destroy you. We're trying to offer you an opportunity to be part of something bigger and more significant than what you could achieve on your own." "And what would that look like?" "A consulting position with Titan Maritime at a salary significantly higher than what you're currently earning. Full benefits, equity participation, and the chance to work on projects with global scope and impact. You'd be heading our West Coast operations with full autonomy over hiring and strategic decisions." Sarah studied his face, looking for tells the way she had studied radar screens, looking for enemy contacts. "Why now, Tom?" Why make this offer after weeks of pressure and intimidation? Because we've realized that we underestimated you. Most small business owners back down when faced with serious competition. You've demonstrated that you're not most business owners. So this is what? A reward for refusing to be intimidated. Tom leaned forward, his voice dropping to a more confidential tone. Admiral, let me be frank. The maritime consulting industry is consolidating whether you participate or not. The question is whether you want to be part of the consolidation or a victim of it. And if I refuse? For the first time, Tom's polished demeanor slipped slightly. Then, you'll continue to face the natural pressures of competing in an increasingly difficult market. Sarah set down her water glass and leaned back in her chair. Tom, I've spent my entire career dealing with people who mistake courtesy for weakness and negotiation for surrender. What you're offering isn't an opportunity. It's a choice between collaboration and destruction. I prefer to think of it as a choice between being pragmatic and being stubborn. Then, let me be perfectly clear about my choice. Shin Maritime Consulting will continue to operate independently. We will continue to compete for contracts based on merit and capability. And we will continue to expose predatory business practices wherever we find them. Sarah stood to leave, but Tom held up his hand. Admiral, before you go, there's one more thing you should consider. Your lawsuit against us is going to be expensive and time-consuming. And even if you win, the legal fees will probably bankrupt your company anyway. Wouldn't it be simpler to just accept our offer and move on with your life? Sarah looked down at him, feeling the calm that always preceded decisive action. Tom, you made the same mistake that a lot of people have made over the years. You think that because I'm polite and professional, I can be intimidated. You're about to learn otherwise. As Sarah walked out of the Harbor Club, she felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with crossing the line into open conflict. There would be no more phone calls or veiled threats. From this point forward, it would be total war. But she had been preparing for this her entire life. The escalation came faster than Sarah had expected. 3 days after her dinner with Thomas Blackwood, Robert Kim called with news that changed everything. Sarah, we have a problem. Titan Maritime has filed a countersuit against you for defamation and tortious interference with their business relationships. Based on what? Your interview with the Business Journal and some statements you apparently made to other business owners about their practices. They're claiming your public accusations have damaged their reputation and cost them potential contracts. Sarah felt her stomach drop. How much are they asking for? $2 million in damages, plus attorney fees and injunctive relief to stop you from making further public statements about their business practices. Can they actually win this? Robert was quiet for a moment. The truth is a defense against defamation, but proving the truth can be expensive. And they have very good lawyers who know how to drag out litigation and drive up costs. After hanging up with Robert, Sarah sat in her empty office, staring at the stack of legal documents that seemed to grow larger each day. The countersuit was clearly designed to bankrupt her before the case ever went to trial. Even if she ultimately won, the legal fees would destroy everything she had built. But as she read through the complaint, Sarah noticed something interesting. Titan Maritime's lawyers had been very specific about which statements they claimed were defamatory. They focused on her allegation that they used intimidation and harassment against competitors, claiming these were false and damaging accusations. Sarah smiled for the first time in days. By filing the countersuit, Titan Maritime had inadvertently opened the door to exactly the kind of discovery she wanted. If they were claiming her statements were false, she now had the right to demand evidence of their business practices with other companies. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The voice was familiar but unexpected. Admiral Chun? This is Captain Rodriguez from Naval Criminal Investigative Service. I believe you know Commander Torres. Yes. Elena mentioned she was looking into some background information for me. Actually, Admiral, that's why I'm calling. Commander Torres' research has uncovered some information that goes beyond what you originally requested. We'd like to meet with you about a matter that may fall under federal jurisdiction. An hour later, Sarah found herself in the NCIS offices downtown, sitting across from Captain Rodriguez and Commander Torres. The conference room had the familiar institutional feel of every military briefing room she had ever sat in. "Admiral Chun," Captain Rodriguez began, "our investigation into Titan Maritime Holdings has revealed some concerning patterns that extend beyond normal business competition." Elena Torres opened a thick file and spread out several documents. "Sarah, what we found goes far beyond aggressive business tactics. We believe Titan Maritime may be engaged in systematic fraud related to government contracts." "What kind of fraud?" "We've identified at least 6 cases where small firms competing for government maritime contracts were suddenly disqualified due to anonymous tips about their business practices or financial stability. In each case, Titan Maritime was awarded the contract after the original winner was disqualified." Captain Rodriguez leaned forward. "Admiral, we think someone inside Titan Maritime has been feeding false information to government contracting officers, specifically targeting smaller firms that might win contracts away from them." Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. "The anonymous tips about my company that David Park mentioned, that's part of a pattern." "It appears so. We've been able to trace several anonymous complaints to the same IP address, which leads back to a consulting firm that has financial ties to Titan Maritime." Elena handed Sarah a document. "This is a summary of what we found so far. If our suspicions are correct, Titan Maritime hasn't just been engaging in aggressive competition. They've been systematically defrauding the federal government by manipulating the contract award process." "What does this mean for my situation?" Captain Rodriguez exchanged a look with Elena. "It means we'd like you to consider working with us. Your lawsuit against them could provide valuable cover for a federal investigation, and the discovery process might uncover evidence that would be useful for criminal prosecution." "What would that involve?" "Officially, nothing different from what you're already doing. Continue with your lawsuit, continue documenting their harassment, continue speaking publicly about their business practices. And unofficially, we'd like you to be our eyes and ears. Any contact they make with you, any offers or threats, any information about their operations. If they're as aggressive as we think they are, they'll probably escalate their campaign against you, and that could give us the evidence we need." Sarah considered the offer carefully. Working with NCIS would provide some protection against Titan Maritime's legal assault, but it would also make her a target for more serious retaliation. "Captain, I need to ask you something. If Titan Maritime discovers I'm working with federal investigators, what kind of response should I expect?" "Honestly, they'll probably try to destroy you completely. Corporate criminals don't usually respond well to the threat of federal prosecution. And if they don't discover it, they'll continue to escalate until they make a mistake that gives us what we need to prosecute them." Sarah thought about her conversation with Captain Morrison about the difference between fighting for money and fighting for principle. This was no longer about protecting her small business. This was about stopping a criminal enterprise that was systematically defrauding the government and destroying legitimate companies. "What do you need me to do?" Elena smiled. "For now, just keep doing what you're doing. But we'll need you to document everything and report any contact from Titan Maritime immediately." That evening, Sarah worked late in her office, preparing for the next phase of what had become a much larger battle than she had originally imagined. She was creating detailed files of every interaction with Titan Maritime when her phone rang. "Admiral Chun, this is Marcus Vance. I think it's time we had a direct conversation." "I'm listening." "You're making this much more complicated than it needs to be. The lawsuit, the media attention, the accusations against my company, all of this can go away very easily." "Ow!" "Withdraw your lawsuit. Issue a public apology for your false statements about our business practices and Close Chun Maritime Consulting. In exchange, we'll withdraw our countersuit and provide you with a consulting contract worth $200,000 per year for the next 5 years." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing the offer. It was significantly more generous than what Thomas Blackwood had proposed at dinner, which suggested that her public campaign was having an impact. "Marcus, let me make sure I understand your offer. You want me to admit that I lied about your company's practices, shut down my business, and become your employee? I want you to be practical, Admiral. You're facing legal bills that could easily exceed $500,000. Your reputation in the industry has been damaged by the countersuit. Your clients are nervous about being associated with a company under litigation. Take the offer and move on with your life. And if I refuse? Marcus's voice hardened. Then you'll face the full consequences of declaring war on a company with unlimited resources for legal defense. We'll tie you up in court for years, drain your savings, and destroy any chance you have of working in this industry again. Sarah felt the familiar calm that came with absolute clarity about her situation. Marcus, I've been listening to threats from people like you for 30 years. The only difference is that most of them had the courage to make their threats while wearing a uniform instead of hiding behind lawyers. Admiral, you're making a serious mistake. No, Marcus. You made the serious mistake when you decided to target someone who spent her career fighting people exactly like you. After hanging up, Sarah immediately called the number Captain Rodriguez had given her for emergency contact. Captain, I just received another call from Marcus Vance. He offered me a $250,000 consulting contract in exchange for withdrawing my lawsuit and admitting I made false statements about their company. Did you record the conversation? No, but I could provide detailed notes about exactly what was said. Good. This suggests they're getting desperate. Can you be available tomorrow morning for a briefing? We may need to accelerate our timeline. The next morning, Sarah found herself back in the NCIS conference room, but this time the atmosphere was more urgent. Captain Rodriguez was joined by two agents she hadn't met before, and Elena Torres looked like she hadn't slept. Admiral Chun, Captain Rodriguez began. Overnight, we received some information that changes our investigation significantly. One of the new agents, who introduced himself as Special Agent Carson, opened a laptop and turned it towards Sarah. We've been monitoring some electronic communications related to Titan Maritime's operations. Last night, we intercepted a conversation between Marcus Vance and someone at a law firm discussing ways to permanently neutralize the Chun problem. Sarah felt her blood run cold. What exactly does that mean? We're not sure yet, but the conversation included discussion of private investigators, background checks, and finding leverage to use against you. Elena leaned forward. Sarah, they may be planning to dig into your personal life, looking for anything they can use to discredit you or pressure you into backing down. What kind of leverage could they possibly find? I've been in the military for 28 years. My record is an open book. Special Agent Carson exchanged a look with Captain Rodriguez. Admiral, in our experience, corporate predators don't limit themselves to professional attacks. They look for anything they can use: family members with problems, financial pressures, personal relationships, anything that might make you vulnerable. Sarah thought about her husband, Tom, who was completely unaware of the escalating situation with Titan Maritime. She thought about her elderly parents living in a retirement community in Phoenix. She thought about the other small business owners who had been targeted by similar tactics. Captain, what kind of protection can you provide? Limited, unfortunately. We're not a personal protection service, but we can monitor their communications and try to give you advance warning if they're planning something specific. What about my family? We can provide some guidance on personal security measures, and we can investigate any direct threats. But ultimately, the best protection is resolving the situation as quickly as possible. Special Agent Carson closed his laptop and looked directly at Sarah. Admiral, we need to be honest with you about the risks you're taking. If our suspicions about Titan Maritime are correct, they're not just aggressive competitors. They're criminals who have built their business on fraud and intimidation. People like that don't surrender easily. Are you asking me to back down? We're asking you to understand what you're up against. If you continue to work with us, Titan Maritime will probably escalate their campaign against you. They may try to destroy your reputation, pressure your family, or find other ways to make your life miserable. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the San Diego harbor where Navy ships moved through their daily routines. Somewhere out there, sailors were standing watch, protecting things they might never fully understand but knew were important. Captain, let me tell you something about the Navy. We don't choose our battles based on whether they're easy or safe. We choose them based on whether they're necessary. She turned back to face the room. Titan Maritime isn't just attacking my business. They're attacking the principle that honest competition should determine who succeeds and who fails. They're stealing government contracts through fraud. They're destroying legitimate businesses through intimidation. Someone has to stop them. Are you sure about this, Admiral? Once we move to the next phase, there's no going back. Sarah thought about all the small business owners she had talked to over the past weeks. People who had worked for years to build something meaningful only to see it destroyed by predatory tactics. She thought about Maria, looking for a new job because she couldn't afford to be unemployed while the legal battle played out. Most of all, she thought about the principle that had guided her entire career. Sometimes the hardest fights are the most important ones. Captain, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. As Sarah left the NCIS office, she knew that she had crossed another line. This was no longer about protecting her business or even exposing Titan Maritime's practices. This was about justice and accountability in a system that too often allowed the powerful to prey on the vulnerable. She also knew that Titan Maritime's response would be swift and vicious. But for the first time since this battle began, she wasn't facing it alone. The attack came exactly 1 week later, and it was more vicious than Sarah had anticipated. She arrived at her office Monday morning to find a crowd of reporters waiting outside her building, cameras rolling and microphones thrust toward her face. Admiral Chun, do you have any comment on the allegations in this morning's Times article? Sarah felt her stomach drop, but she kept her expression neutral. I haven't seen this morning's paper. What allegations are you referring to? The reporter held up his phone, showing a headline that made Sarah's blood run cold. Retired Admiral under investigation for military contract fraud. According to sources familiar with the investigation, you're being investigated by the Department of Defense for allegedly using your military connections to secure preferential treatment for your consulting firm. Sarah recognized the tactic immediately. Unable to make their legal threats stick, Titan Maritime had decided to destroy her reputation through a carefully orchestrated media campaign. The beauty of the strategy was its simplicity. Even completely false allegations would be repeated and amplified until they became accepted truth. I'm not going to dignify false allegations with a response, Sarah said, pushing through the crowd toward her building entrance. My record speaks for itself. But as she reached her office, Sarah realized that the media ambush was only the beginning. Her phone was already ringing with calls from confused clients and concerned friends. Her email inbox was filling with requests for comment from reporters and angry messages from potential business partners who wanted to distance themselves from controversy. The article itself, when Sarah finally had a chance to read it, was a masterpiece of character assassination disguised as journalism. It cited anonymous sources claiming that Sarah had leveraged her naval connections to secure contracts inappropriately. It referenced ongoing investigations without providing specifics about who was conducting them. Most damaging of all, it included quotes from former naval officers who claimed they had concerns about mixing military service with private profit. Sarah recognized none of the names quoted in the article, which suggested that Titan Maritime had either found officers with grudges against her or simply fabricated sources entirely. But the damage was immediate and severe. David Park called within an hour of the article's publication. Sarah, I'm sorry, but we have to suspend our relationship immediately. Our board met this morning and voted unanimously to terminate all contracts with firms under federal investigation. David, I'm not under federal investigation. These allegations are completely false. I believe you, but belief isn't enough. We can't afford to be associated with even the appearance of impropriety. By noon, Sarah had received similar calls from 4 other clients. Her business was effectively dead, killed not by evidence or truth, but by the mere suggestion of wrongdoing. But as she sat in her empty office, Sarah realized that Titan Maritime had made a critical tactical error. By escalating to public character assassination, They had crossed a line that would trigger immediate federal response. Her phone rang, and Captain Rodriguez's voice was tense. "Admiral, we need to meet immediately. The article this morning changes everything." An hour later, Sarah was back in the NCIS conference room, but the atmosphere was completely different. Elena Torres was practically vibrating with anger, and Special Agent Carson looked like he was ready to make arrests. "Admiral," Captain Rodriguez began, "the article in the Times contains information that could only have come from classified military records." "What do you mean?" Elena opened a file and pointed to a specific paragraph in the article. "This section mentions a procurement decision you made in 2018 involving a contract for navigation equipment. The details cited here aren't public information. They're from classified operational reports, which means someone with access to military records leaked information to damage your reputation," Special Agent Carson added. "That's a federal crime, and it gives us everything we need to move against Titan Maritime." Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with fury. "What's the next step?" "We execute search warrants on Titan Maritime's offices and Marcus Vance's personal residence. We seize their computer systems, financial records, and communication devices. And we arrest anyone we can connect to the leak of classified information." When Captain Rodriguez checked his watch, "In about 3 hours. The warrants are already signed." As Sarah left the NCIS office, she felt the familiar calm that came with the moments before decisive action. After weeks of defense, it was time to take the offensive. But she also had one more battle to fight, this one much more personal. That evening, Sarah sat across from her husband Tom in their kitchen, finally, ready to tell him the full story of what had been happening. Tom was an engineer with the city water department, a quiet man who had supported her naval career through multiple deployments and career changes. But he had never seen her under this kind of attack. "The article in the Times this morning," she began, "it's part of a systematic campaign to destroy my business and my reputation." Tom listened without interruption as Sarah laid out the entire timeline. The initial threats, the legal intimidation, the media campaign, and her cooperation with federal investigators. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah, why didn't you tell me about this sooner?" "Because I thought I could handle it myself. Because I didn't want to worry you. Because I hoped it would be resolved quickly. And now it's going to get worse before it gets better. There will probably be more articles, more allegations, more reporters asking questions. I need you to know that none of it is true, but I also need you to understand that I can't back down from this fight." Tom reached across the table and took her hand. "Sarah, I've been married to you for 25 years. I watched you face down challenges that would break most people. If you say this fight is necessary, then it's necessary. Even if it means months of harassment and public scrutiny, especially then. The woman I married doesn't run from fights when the stakes matter." The next morning brought news that changed everything. Sarah was having her first peaceful cup of coffee in weeks when Elena Torres called. "Sarah, turn on Channel 8 News. You're going to want to see this." Sarah grabbed the remote and found a local news station just in time to see federal agents carrying boxes out of Titan Maritime's downtown offices. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Federal Raids, Target Maritime Consulting Firm." The news anchor was reading from a prepared statement. "Federal agents executed search warrants early this morning at the offices of Titan Maritime Holdings, seizing computer equipment and financial records as part of an ongoing investigation into allegations of government contract fraud." The camera cut to Captain Rodriguez standing outside the Titan Maritime building, reading a prepared statement. "The Naval Criminal Investigative Service, working with the FBI and other federal agencies, is investigating allegations that Titan Maritime Holdings engaged in systematic fraud involving federal government contracts. This investigation is ongoing, and we expect additional arrests in the coming days." Sarah's phone immediately started ringing with calls from reporters, clients, and other business owners who had been targeted by Titan Maritime. But the most important call came from Robert Kim. "Sarah, I have some very interesting news. Titan Maritime's attorneys called this morning asking to discuss settlement of both your lawsuit and their countersuit. What kind of settlement? Complete dismissal of all legal actions, public acknowledgement that the allegations against you are false, and a substantial financial settlement in recognition of the damage to your business. How substantial? They're offering $500,000 and a written apology to be published in the same papers that ran the defamatory article. Sarah considered the offer carefully. $500,000 would more than compensate for her lost business and legal fees. It would allow her to rebuild Chun Maritime Consulting on solid financial ground. But it would also allow the people responsible for the attack to avoid accountability for their actions. Robert, counter with $1 million, published apologies in every major maritime industry publication in cooperation with ongoing federal investigations. Sarah, they'll never agree to cooperation with investigations. Then, they don't want to settle badly enough. The raids this morning show that they're facing criminal prosecution, not just civil liability. If they want my cooperation in making this go away quietly, they'll have to pay for it. That afternoon brought the news Sarah had been waiting for. Marcus Vance and Thomas Blackwood had been arrested on charges of government contract fraud, conspiracy, and leaking classified information. The indictments alleged a pattern of criminal behavior spanning 4 years and involving dozens of fraudulent contract awards. But the most satisfying call came from David Park. Sarah, I owe you an apology. Our board met this morning to discuss the federal investigation of Titan Maritime, and we realized that you were the victim, not the perpetrator, of the fraud we were trying to avoid. I appreciate that, David. More than that, we want to offer you an expanded consulting contract. The work you've done exposing this fraud has saved the government millions of dollars and prevented dozens of legitimate businesses from being destroyed. What kind of expanded contract? We want you to develop a comprehensive program for identifying and preventing procurement fraud in maritime contracts. It would be a 3-year agreement worth about $2 million. Sarah felt the weight of the past weeks lifting from her shoulders. Not only had she survived Titan Maritime's assault, but she had emerged stronger and more successful than before. A week later, Sarah was back in her office, but everything had changed. Maria had returned, bringing with her 2 additional employees to handle the expanded workload. The phone rang constantly with inquiries from companies wanting to hire the consulting firm that had exposed one of the industry's biggest fraud schemes. But the most meaningful moment came when she received a letter from Admiral Hayes, the former head of Navy procurement operations. Admiral Chun, the letter read, "Your courage in exposing the Titan Maritime fraud has strengthened the integrity of our entire procurement system. You have upheld the highest traditions of naval service by putting principle before profit and refusing to be intimidated by those who would abuse their power." Sarah framed the letter and hung it on the wall next to her Navy commendations, a reminder that some battles are worth fighting regardless of the personal cost. The final chapter of the Titan Maritime story came 6 months later, when Marcus Vance and Thomas Blackwood were sentenced to federal prison for their fraud schemes. The company itself was dissolved, its assets seized to pay restitution to the businesses it had destroyed. But for Sarah, the real victory wasn't the criminal convictions or the financial settlement. It was the knowledge that she had stood up to bullies who thought they could intimidate her into submission. She had proven that integrity and courage could still triumph over power and money. On a quiet morning in her expanded offices, Sarah stood at the window looking out over San Diego Bay. The harbor was busy with ships moving cargo that connected her city to the rest of the world. Somewhere out there, Navy vessels were conducting their missions, protecting the waters she had once patrolled herself. Her assistant knocked on the door. "Admiral, there's a call for you from a small shipping company in Seattle. They say they're having problems with a large competitor trying to force them out of business." Sarah smiled and returned to her desk. Put them through. Some fights, she had learned, never really end. They just prepare you for the next battle that matters.